gentlemen, it is time for prize fighters, circus freaks, and gangsters.
A podcast about the fighting, the fashion, the food, and the general mayhem of the 19th century.
I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greta.
And we love the 19th century. Greta, tell everybody why we love the 19th century so much.
It's a freaking mess.
Even compared to the 21st century or the 20th century, the 19th century is a disaster, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sort of everything that we look upon as both good and sort of the best and the worst of times, the seeds for all of that was incubating in the 19th century. I mean, we have modern food developing, we have modern travel, we have modern communication, we have modern propaganda. We have sort of emerging ideas of physical beauty. It's all there.
And it is so dirty at the same time and gross and kind of sad. It's everything. It's the beginning of everything that we have now. It's kind of the genesis of the modern world happened then. And so it's kind of like if you just took everything from now and made it as horrifically filthy and janky as humanly possible, wouldn't you say?
And everybody is very dramatic. You could really die at any second, so go big.
Yeah, I never thought that was the explanation for the amount of drama that seemed to be injected into every second of everything, especially their poetry, but I guess that would be the reason. They were on the verge of death at all times.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the only explanation, but it doesn't hurt.
So, because we love the 19th century so much, we decided to pick Gangs of New York as the jumping off point for discussing this amazing century, because the movie is so good, and it is
jam crammed with everything that we're talking about here, and every scene is full of stuff. So it's the whole 19th century crammed into one movie as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And it also is a really great place for us to begin to discuss the difference between the American mythology and American history, because I think that kind of gets confused a lot of times. And this movie is part and parcel of that process. But by the same token, those pop culture things that have kind of skewed history away from the truth have also been the things that have taught people the history that we know.
And what's really fun is that mythologizing really went hard in the 19th century, and we get to see some of it happening and some of the figures who are involved in it. You know what? I think we might just need to get started here.
Let's do it. Kick it off.
Okay. All right, so here we are, Gangs of New York, and things are, well, they're dark, and we've got the baby version of our main character, little baby Amsterdam, and he is, well, he's underground.
So much of this movie occurs underground. I don't know how much of the 19th century occurred underground, but, I mean, I guess it's the only way to take the 19th century and make it even worse. Add more rats.
Oh, but I mean, it's a good depiction because it's in the dark. It's smoky. It's grubby. I mean, they're walking out through like all sorts of like fabulous stereotypical 19th century scenes. You've got the blacksmith. You've got, people sharpening terrifying handmade weapons. You've got a big old cross. Religion is super important. I mean, what else do you see in there?
Well, I think religion was really important as identity politics at the time. I don't think when we look at religion in the past, I don't think it's so much not so much the belief in the religion as it is the belief that their team is right. I don't know. I feel like those people were more like soccer hooligans than they were like religious zealots.
Oh, yeah, no, I think that's a great point, that religion means so many different things to so many different people at different times, and we have this sort of idea that where people were sort of like praying and pure of heart. Like, when was that ever true for most of the people? And this is just sort of, definitely soccer teams. I mean, you go back into medieval times and people were like just dressing up with the colors of their side and fighting for their bishop and taking swings.
And that's exactly what you see when they emerge out of this tunnel, and the two sides are arrayed against each other in their incredibly fabulous outfits. I mean, the costuming and, like you said, the set design in this film was unbelievable. I mean, they actually created 5 city blocks of 19th century New York in Rome. But it was beautiful, and it looked so authentic.
Oh, and that shot as you go past sort of the tenements where you just have that literally writhing mass of humanity in the dim candlelit darkness. I think that sets us off perfectly. Every human activity that could happen is happening if you look at it.
Yes, they're dancing, and they have the Africans who are doing that awesome capoeira style dancing that the name of the style from Africa escapes me at the moment, but it was so cool to see that, and I only noticed it in the rewatch when we watched it together, but I mean, that was just a fantastic little tidbit, but it reminds us of how diverse the country was at that time, and that whole opening scene really encapsulates the diversity of New York City at the time and the 5 points, because you had so many different groups there. Africans, Irish, Germans, Italians, and then the nativists, all in, it wasn't so much a melting pot as it was a roiling cauldron of fetid fumes and hatred.
So, we're in the darkness, and it's like, okay, so it's time for the big rumble, and little Amsterdam and his dad, they head outside into the big white world.
Yeah, and the outfits in this thing were insane. And I every single time that Daniel Day-Lewis comes on screen in this, my wife is so irritated. She hates this movie to begin with, but then she hates it even more because I'm like, come in, you gotta see this outfit. And she's like, I've seen the outfit and I hate the movie and I don't care. And you had a really interesting comment about the outfits that immediately came out of your mouth while we were watching this scene. It was regarding the fit of the outfit.
Oh, that was actually the fight scene.
Was it? Oh,
yeah, because they're moving around in it. I mean, here, they just look spectacular and threatening, but greasy at the same time, for sure.
Oh, yeah, and that's why my wife hates it. It's because in every scene, Daniel Day-Lewis is just dripping with sweat and filth and grease, and I don't think he was even dirty or oily enough to really convey how filthy that era was. But yeah, she was so put off by that. She was like, I don't need to be reminded of how awful that era was. And I was like, but it was so much worse.
Yeah, I mean, a really fun thing is they established pretty quick is one set of guys are the red guys and one set of guys are the blue guys. And that has to do with the cheapest and most available dyes of the time.
Yes, I recall you explaining that. And what were the two? So that synthetic dyes didn't really start happening until lavender. It was invented later in the 19th century, but
right. And at this point, these guys, they're pretty poor, but all of the blue is from indigo because every freaking thing was dyed with indigo because it was super sturdy. It has to do with why a lot of paper from that era has a blue tinge because they were making paper out of rags.
I never had any idea that was the case.
We could go way deep into that, but not right now. But the red was either madder, which is it's just another plant dye, or cochineal, which is the squished up South American bugs.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. Squishing bugs. I guess they're just done the same way that you would mash up grapes. They just throw a bunch of them in a barrel and somebody gets in there and stomps them to death, or what?
They would grind them, and I'm sure there's a whole process to it. But fun fact, the reason that they're that color is because they're eating basically prickly pear fruits. You know those cactus fruits that are that super crazy magenta color? Yeah, that's where they're getting that color from.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So all the colors are authentic then, too, that we're seeing in this film. All right. Dope. So, and then what is happening now?
Okay. And now it's just a frickin' melee. I mean...
Oh, it really starts with an MTV-style battle. That was the era of Braveheart and The Patriot and stuff. So they really had quite a set, too, I guess they would have said then. And I would like to point out that the fighting in this era was not nearly as violent as this movie might convey. If there's... the hand-to-hand combat was more violent. The pitched battle type stuff really wasn't happening. Even in the entire city riots that occurred, there only 100 people died. And in the fight scene that they're showing us at the beginning of this movie, it looks like 100 people die right out of the gate.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, no, this is definitely no rules. It's weapons. I mean, nobody's really using hands, and it's a little bit. I mean, who knows if they were really doing melees of this style, because like if you've got two gangs, you're gonna kill off your gang and have nobody to fight.
Exactly. They were really. It was more like any tribal fighting that happens anywhere. Small groups get together. One side establishes dominance. They probably hurt somebody, but they don't kill them necessarily. And the other side retreats and they move on. It's just like any other animal in the wild. But yeah, that thing really made it seem like they were just wiping each other out. It was just genocide from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Like most of the weapons that they show are stuff that would be around: knives, hatchets, clubs, whatever, and then that big giant iron cross, obviously. And then there's a few swords, which like, yeah, I can, like, since they're making this point, like they've got these ties to the ancestral home, like maybe there were a few swords around.
Do you? I mean, fencing was still popular then, and
No, these are like broadsword type thingies. They are not pokey swords.
Well, the broadswords were part of fencing at the time, so it was. I mean, sabers were used, so it was possible. I would say that the homemade weapons, the janky, scary saw-like homemade weapons, I would say look like the specious ones in my mind.
Yeah, though I mean, you've got the blacksmith that we go by, so he could have been altering stuff.
That is true.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a big frickin' brawl, and you take down the king lion of one side, so that's the end.
Yes, and it introduces us to the character Bill the Butcher Cutting, who was based on an actual New Yorker who I've written about. His name was Bill the Butcher Poole, and he was named Bill the Butcher not because he killed people, but because he was a butcher by trade. And there were lots of wrestlers at that time, so it makes you sound super tough because your nickname's the Butcher, but it's actually just you're jacked because you've been eating a ton of meat your entire life. And you're jacked because your dad was jacked because he was a butcher. You know what I mean? Daniel Day-Lewis is about the right size for him because the guy was 6 foot, 200 pounds, and he was a crazy badass brawler. So that he was dead by the time the events of this movie would have actually occurred. So as we were saying at the beginning, this is the historical mythology coming in. They kind of smashed a bunch of stuff that happened in 3 different books. Herbert Asbury's Gangs of New York, and then 2 other books. One was A Pickpocket's Tale, and the other one escapes me. But they mashed them together, and they kind of mashed the history of all of these different New Yorkers together to give us this awesome kind of boiled down distillation of the era. But it isn't exactly historically accurate as the events transpired, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I think that's not important for this whole movie thing, because you're taking important events and smushing them together into sort of one giant epic. And yeah, I don't think picking apart, like, as you said, when stuff happened exactly is so important, as opposed to like, no, these are the way people reacted to this sort of event, and this is what you get.
Oh, I completely agree. The only reason I bring it up is because it's with the Cleopatra debate currently raging in the news. It's kind of top of mind for me that, people really like to nitpick these details, and I just wanted to point out that, I mean, it's historically accurate to a T. It's just the story it's telling is not necessarily historically accurate because the events may not have transpired exactly in the order that they did in this film.
Well, and I think what's really fun in this movie is you get people being concerned with the things that they're going to be concerned with. And so the whole Cleopatra thing is hilarious because we don't know what colors people's skins were because they were building their statues out of all sorts of different kinds of rock and painting them, which is all gone. And, skin color wasn't a big deal until, sort of the 15th, 16th century.
These are recent developments. So, I would say it's the color of her skin is totally immaterial, but it could have been any shade, honestly, because they were all happening at the time, and they were all in that region.
Yeah, and people traveled a lot more than we think about that they did. I mean, yes, most people stayed close to home, but there were a class of people that got
And
around.
she wanted to be remembered as a woman who was able to succeed in spite of an insane patriarchal establishment positioned against her. And she became incredibly powerful and incredibly respected. And the statues and stuff that we have of her are of the strength of her rather than the color of her. And that kind of goes back to our film where we just want the essence of it, which is how filthy and crazy these people were.
Well, it's so filthy and crazy and just a different way of life. So you have a loose kid on the street. What do you do with him? You send him to an orphanage, right?
Oh, an orphanage, a lovely, lovely orphanage where he'll be raised, to pull himself up by those bootstraps that are littered all over the ground in America. And it had the most idyllic name in the world, Hell's Gate, didn't it? I mean, it warms the heart. He's going to go on to be great because he came from Hell's Gate.
Well, you're definitely working with a crew of people who don't believe in the primary innocence of children. They all have the devil inside them, and what, you have to beat that out of them?
We gotta beat it out of them. And whew. So he comes out of there, and our hero is Amsterdam Vallon, and he is based on a real person, John Morrissey, who became the first Irish mobster and the first mobster in the New World. And he formed the mob that the Irish mob took over when this man died. But Amsterdam Vallon in this film was an orphan whose dad was the leader of the Dead Rabbits, this historic New York gang. And so he has harbored all this rage and hate for the 30 whatever years, and now he's come back to exact his revenge against Bill the Butcher.
All right. So we more or less have that. Yeah, he's got a little kernel of hatred in his heart that's keeping him alive. He finally makes his way out of Hell's Gate and is, whether he's coming from the West Coast or whether he's coming out of an orphanage, he's thrust upon the clamor of New York City, and you've got everybody there.
Oh, yeah. And when they go through all the different people in there, who is your favorite? I mean, do you have the list in front of you? Who was there? Who they run through?
Oh, I don't, but
they kind of cover all the gangs and the plug uglies and the Dead Rabbits aren't mentioned because obviously they're all dead.
Yeah. I did just sort of enjoy kind of in terms of the religiosity as he gets out of the orphanage and he's running away. He throws the Bible off the bridge. Like, it's not even worth keeping to like burn or turn into cigarettes or trade or anything. Like, he so wants to be done with that.
Yeah, well, I imagine he was probably beaten by enough priests that he had no use for the Bible after that.
Yeah. So we get into like what the heck is going on in New York, and it's a big mess. You've got the start of the Civil War. There's a lot of racial hatred. You've got all the Irish coming in from the famine caused by the English. You've got the Chinese who are there to build the railroads. You've got it's a stew pot.
And there was no good guys in this. It was just a maelstrom. And the place where this was set, 5 Points, was a drained pond that was filled with trash and like decaying vegetable matter and whatever, and then it was just covered over with dirt, and so it just reeked of the methane that was coming up through the ground because all this rotting vegetation under it. So like the 19th century stunk anyway, and now it stinks even worse, and these people are miserable and they all hate each other. So there's a group of Americans who call themselves the nativists, and they hate everyone. And then there's the Irish, who were just trapped because they fled Ireland and they came to the United States hoping that it would get better, and then they're just getting beaten on by the English, the sons of the English then, and all of these different people, like the he-she's that are shown and the gangs and stuff. Like it was such a diverse place, but everybody was so oppositional to each other. There was, where we have that idea that there was this fomentation of national unity and everybody kind of bound together in the North against the South. No, there was none of that. It was just everybody against everybody all the time. It was wild.
And the nativists were, was as dumb then as it is now, because they were thinking of themselves like, hey, we're the people who count, completely ignoring all of the Native Americans who were there first, or all of, the Black Americans who got there at the same time.
Yeah, because it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, like the very beginning of it. And so as people were moving into the cities and they were trying to get these new industrial jobs that were all horrific, and people were dying in the factories, and they were stuffed into these tenements that were horrific, and they had no ventilation, and they were burning down all the time. Like, it was a place with no hope. And then they were getting stuffed into a place with no hope, and then more people were coming in, and they were just like, oh my God, now they're piling more people on top of us. So you can, I guess, a little bit kind of understand why they are aggrieved, but by the same token, they're not seeing it from anyone else's perspective. They're just kind of in this pressure cooker, and they're screaming like a teapot.
Well, and it's funny because just about everybody who's coming to New York at this point comes from somewhere probably pretty small. And so the idea of any sort of city planning, sewers, running water, garbage planning, like none of that exists. And so like they don't know what to do either. But who does have big plans for 5 Points? Our dude, Boss Tweed.
Oh, yes. In Tammany Hall. And I looked up Tammany to find out so Tammany he's the MLK before MLK. We had this dude, he was and I've never known the correct, even though I'm from Pennsylvania, I don't know the correct pronunciation. I think it's Lenape, but he was a Lenape Indian, which was part of the Iroquois Confederacy that had a constitution on which the American Constitution was based. He was part of this confederation, and he was the big peacemaker between the Iroquois Confederation and William Penn. So he signed this peace treaty, and he became this symbol of national unity. And it was kind of like the guy everybody was supposed to rally behind, because they were like, if we all just kind of work together rather than fighting, we can make this place a better place. And so they created this place called Tammany Hall in New York that was the Democratic headquarters. And at the time, the Democrats were the Republicans now. They switched sides during the civil rights. These were angry nativist people who were paying Bill the Butcher to beat people up and burn their houses down and do all kinds of things to keep them from voting, so that they wouldn't elect a Republican in that would then push them out of office and keep them from getting all their graft and whatever.
So vote suppression's been going on for as long as we've been doing voting, it sounds like.
And it was way worse back then. I mean, my God, they show it in the film. They would just kick in your door and beat the crap out of you and be like, if you show up at the polls, we'll kill you.
Oh, sure.
And they would burn people's houses down. Their party it was called the Know Nothing Party, and that was because they would just say, I know nothing, when they get caught after burning somebody's house down or beating somebody up. Like, they just constantly would say, I know nothing, and that became their name.
So speaking of burning people's houses down, we get to see a house on fire, and you think, oh, no. And then the fire brigade shows up. And then the other fire brigade shows up?
The rival fire brigade. When I learned about Benjamin Franklin founding the first volunteer fire department, I didn't know what system he created. I didn't know how dumb it was. Like, it wasn't a city fire department. It was gangs who would rob your house before it burned down, hopefully keep it from burning down, and then they would sell you your goods back to you. That's insane. And so they looted houses for a living.
There's classical precedent for it. I mean, the Romans did it first.
Oh, well, if they did it, then it's okay, right?
You hear the phrase riches crassus. Yeah. One of the ways he built up a lot of his real estate empire was he had sort of a gang of slaves that he would take around and say, hey, I see your house is burning down. We'll stop it from burning down, but you have to sell it to me for like pennies on the dollar. And so either that way you'd have like a little money, or you could have nothing. But your house was gone either way.
Jesus. Was that before or after Nero? Maybe that was the reason for all his fiddling.
So, yeah, Nero, there's an interesting guy. But yeah, no, this whole thing about how using firefighting as extortion, there's a lot of precedent for it.
It was a mob racket. I mean, so they show these firemen run up and a fireman throws a barrel over the fire hydrant and then sits
it.
on top of it and takes off his fireman shit so he doesn't look like a fireman anymore, and he just looks like a guy sat on top of a barrel watching a building burn. And so these guys don't have any water to fight the fire with, and then they start brawling to determine who will get to put out the fire. And then the mayor shows up. And what is it? You can tell that.
Yeah.
One.
And so once they're like, this building's a loss. So they're like, go into the next door and start looting that one.
Yeah, the homeowner's actually there, and he's like, but my house isn't on fire. And they're like, and the mayor just pushes him out of the way or tells him to shut the fuck up. And then they just start looting his house. They kick in his door, throw shit through the windows. His house is perfectly fine, mind you. And then this was exactly how firemen operated back in the day, which... Firemen are a different breed.
Yeah. No, professionalizing the firefighting service, that meant a lot.
It did.
But yeah, we get to focus back on our hero again, Amsterdam, and he runs across an old friend, Johnny, and they are part of looting that burning house.
I would like to point out that Johnny, for anyone who is old, like the two of us, is Elliot from E.T. He's this ugly little weasel of a man now. But, that's E.T.
Yeah. So, yeah, they come in, they've got their loot, and it's time to Amsterdam's sort of got to figure out, like, where am I going to fit in? You can't exist in New York City, especially in 5 Points at this time, without your own tribe, without your own gang. You can't be a free agent.
No, it's literally like when they say you're going to prison in California, you're going to have to pick a gang. You had to pick a gang or you died. Unless you were just the baddest motherfucker on earth and you never slept.
Yeah. And so he's looking around, trying to remember who the people are. And he's like, okay, Johnny, I remember you. So he heads in and he starts to sort of find his place, and he ends up across from Bill the Butcher. And
I would like to point out that, like we were saying before, with the diversity there were a lot of options for places to hang out. So they did have the he-she's, which were male prostitutes who were very prevalent in New York City at the time, and it was not illegal to be a male prostitute. They had female prostitutes as well. I mean, they had every ethnic gang you could possibly imagine, and then they even had gangs based on what kind of crime you committed, and they had weird names for all of those, and those names are very fun to learn, although I don't recall any of them off the top of my head. Turtle Dove was the one that Cameron Diaz ends up being revealed to be.
So we end up sort of wandering around more of the 5 Points area. There's a fun shot in the pub where we get to see that big barrel of all sorts, which is... if you were super poor...
Well, let's paint the picture. It's a huge wooden barrel on its side with a tube coming out of it. It looks like something that would be in a college dorm in, like, the 1900s, because it's a wooden barrel. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now you...
Yeah, and it says all sorts on the side. And so somebody comes in with an ear because, hey, I've been out causing mayhem. And so they get to take a pull on this barrel of beer, and all sorts refers to the fact that, like, every time every beer barrel kind of has like sludge in the bottom, so you don't throw it away, so you don't waste, you just keep pouring all the different kinds of beer into this one barrel that people get to drink more or less for free. And I mean, that's not quite free, but yeah, and of course everybody's putting their mouth on the same tube, sucking it out of there. So it's like if everybody was drinking out of the keg, but sucking on it instead of pouring it into their mouths.
I love the fact that you glossed right over the fact she walked in it's a woman named Hellcat Maggie or something like that, walks
Yes.
in, lays a human ear on a bar and next to a jar filled with human ears and formaldehyde, and that is her payment to drink this beer garbage out of a tube. This is how bad the 19th century was. She paid in a human ear to drink the worst shit skunk beer that a human being could ever conceive of drinking.
and to get there, she throws people out of the way. I mean, it's just epic.
Yeah, alcoholism is real. Alcoholism's real. And back then, people were legitimately alcoholic in ways that are hard to believe.
Oh, completely. I mean, you think about, okay, you're the guy who got his ear cut off. Like, what is there for you to dull the pain? Like, nothing. You're not rich enough to get your hands on morphine or whatever.
Yeah, this is set in 1863, and I just learned about a baseball player in 1883 who was a professional baseball player. And bear in mind that this woman was not a professional baseball player, so her level of drunkenness is probably going to be different. He was playing pro baseball, and he 3 times a day was drinking a pitcher of beer with a pint of whiskey in it. They were asking him to cut back. Like, alcoholism back then was different. And you said that the alcohol was only distilled 1 to 3 times, right?
Well, it depends on like how rich you were. So if you had the guy who was just doing it from the semi-rotten fruit people were bringing in from their farms, yeah, you might get...
This was not a rich man,
No.
and she wouldn't be a rich woman, so...
No. So that's going to be distilled like once at the most. Of course, the worst way to distill is the way people were distilling like first time around with Applejack, which was kind of like the first distilled spirit we had in the U.S. And what they would do is they would take basically hard apple cider and freeze it.
Okay.
And the first part that would freeze would just be the water. And so you'd pull out the chunks of ice and it would get more and more alcoholic. But if you think about the way stuff is distilled now, there's the tops and the tails, which are all the other stuff that happens during fermentation that it's not so good. And so like anytime anybody distills, they just take out the middle part and that's the good stuff. But when you're just pulling out chunks of ice, you're concentrating all of the terrible things as well.
Oh my God, that's psychotic. It would be like, it's like one time, I didn't know the rule about bum liquor being anything with 101 in the name. And I bought Lightning 101. It was this peppermint schnapps. And I had a hangover for like 5 days. It was as bad as when I got roofied. It was so fucking bad. And Applejack would have to be worse than that, which is inconceivable. But so these people are not only sweaty and filthy and covered in coal grime and, you know, soot from cooking fires and all of this oil that's in the air that's carried there by all these particulates. So they are really greasy. But then they're drinking this shit beer and baying in human ears. This was a time to be alive.
So what's fun about that pub where you can pay in a human ear? This is Bill the Butcher's hangout. Like this is where Amsterdam gets his audience, sort of sees, you know, this is Johnny's gang, this is going to be my gang. And how do you get into a gang? You pull a job and you get into a fight, right?
Yeah, and so he walks right in there, and that's so one of the criticisms that a lot of reviewers because I read a lot of reviews about this and listened to some podcasts, they were complaining about how confusing it was and how you couldn't tell why people were on each other's sides. And Bill the Butcher is a nativist, so he hates Irish, but his thug guy, which is hilariously the tiniest little man. I mean, he's a little dude. He looks as British as a man could look. His ears are sticking so far out from the sides of his head. He's this little British or a little Irish guy, and he comes up and he and Leo get into this brawl, and Leo kicks his ass, and then Bill the Butcher's making fun of him, and people would complain that there wasn't any explanation for why this Irish guy was working with Bill the Butcher, but it was literally the same back in the day. Back there, these alliances were really weird, and the same thing happens now. Like you get the Aryans in California are allied with all the Latin gangs. It doesn't make any sense, but it happened.
Yeah, and it's gangs and armies and nations. I mean, these alliances are semi-permanent, they're fluid, and they're all about everybody trying to play chess on everybody else. But yeah, that fight is where, you know, I'm watching these guys fight, and I'm like, thank you for doing the wardrobe.
Oh, yes.
Because, like, their clothes are kind of baggy, they don't fit so well, you know, everything's held up by suspenders, their shirts are all loose. So these guys are buying used clothes. So they're going to the rag picker and they're getting clothes that somebody else has worn and thrown out.
They were mostly wearing a ton of denim at this time, weren't they?
Not what we would call denim. It would be more canvas, and so it would be rougher.
Okay.
But the shirts themselves would often be linen because that was sturdier than cotton. Okay. And so again, if you're buying used clothes that fit okay, you know, you want a linen shirt, so that's going to hang on for longer. And so, yeah, they're wearing a lot of linen and wool at this point.
Their fabrics back then were a lot different, though, because I was recently watching a show about Henry VIII, and they were talking about how you could make linen back, or they made linen back then that was so fine it was like silk.
Yeah, that again, you had to be super duper rich. And at this point, you're starting to get machine spun thread. Up until this point, a lot of the fibers that you're using to weave cloth is hand spun to a certain degree and is often only twisted in a single direction. Whereas most of the thread that we use now, like what you go buy at the fabric store or whatever,
Okay.
has a core and an outer. There's more twists on the thread to sort of keep it held together.
Okay.
But yeah, so the fact that these guys, their clothes only sort of fit, I think is great. The reason it struck me because
they still looked cool as hell, though. Like, I mean,
oh yeah,
Daniel Day-Lewis looked about as tough as a human being could look. I don't think that anybody has ever looked any tougher than Daniel Day-Lewis in that movie. Honestly.
his clothes do fit pretty well because like he's a big important dude, and so of course he gets things somewhat tailored. And then like Boss Tweed, he's like sort of a big portly guy, and he's super powerful, super rich, so his clothes are being custom made. But when I was watching the other show Warrior that we're going to talk about later, I was noticing that everybody had like super tailored outfits over very modern shaped bodies.
Oh, their clothes are gorgeous in that fucking... Oh, my God. I mean, I didn't even know I was a fashionista, I don't think, until I watched that show, and I was just like, babe, you got to come in here and watch this show for the clothes. And she was like, all right, I'm coming in there, metrosexual man.
Well, here's the funny thing. I mean, my kiddo, he's always noticed colors. He's always really liked colors, and as a little kid he kind of got shamed by both his friends and some adults for being a dude who was interested in colors. And so I kept on showing him this whole obsession with like dressing in nothing attention grabbing is such a modern idiocy, because you look at all the guys walking around doing the Declaration of Independence, everybody, working up to the Civil War. These guys had custom-made clothes. They picked out their fabric. They picked out their buttons. They picked out their shoe buckles. I mean, they were showing off fashion.
And they had stolen a lot of shit as pirates to choose from. So, I mean, all they really needed was a tailor, and they could have anything they stole modified to fit their physique.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were all privateers, weren't they? Ben Franklin wasn't, but pretty much everybody else was.
Actually, a lot of the guys who were doing the writing and making the laws, they weren't pirates, but they knew pirates. And my favorite thing that I'm sort of tracking down is that Paul Revere was basically a fence.
Huh. I did learn yesterday from Lucy Worsley on the BBC that, oh God, I'm so in love with that woman. But that Paul Revere was, and that's what she was talking about, the American mythology versus the history, and how Paul Revere was one of 3 writers, and they just completely exclude the other 2 because Longfellow wrote a poem about Paul Revere's great ride, and that's where we got our quote-unquote history about it.
I think its name probably scanned better in the rhyming scheme that Longfellow was writing. You look at sort of all of the silver that was going on to fancy people's tables in the 18th century and the 19th century, and you're like, okay, America doesn't have any silver mines, at least not North America. Where are they getting all of this silver from? They're getting it from all the pirates that are hijacking all the Spanish ships coming out of Central and South America. And so now you've got like a whole bunch of doubloons. You've got all of this raw silver. Like, how do you make it legit? And so you'd bring it to the silversmiths, because there's also not a mint in North America before the Revolutionary War. And so even though nobody has any money.
And that's where Johnny Tremaine comes in. Jesus.
Yes.
That book had a reason for me to read it. I guess that book has been burned into my brain because of the way his hand was mangled. For anybody who is old, you've read this book, and it was about a kid who was an apprentice silversmith back in this era.
Yeah, there was like this really weirdly huge number of silversmiths in the mid-Atlantic region, and they were functionally fences for the pirates.
That's fun. There were no good guys, and when we're thinking of America at this time, this was a nation of rebel farmers. most of whom hated each other.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
was not like any kind of unified place, nor was it industrialized or metropolitan. We didn't show up on the map. We were like Somalia, basically,
Oh,
is
yeah.
now. Nobody gave a shit about us. They all thought we were garbage. Yeah, the only reason America exists is because we were the Vietnam in a Cold War between, or in a proxy war between the British and the French.
Oh, yeah.
There's no fucking reason for us to exist. We should have just stayed British. But anyway, we're moving on with our story.
Okay, so yeah, we have a great fight. Amsterdam wins. Bill decides, all right, I'll take you under my wing. And he's enjoying this greatly because, of course, taking under your wing the son of the guy that you killed in a hell of a gang fight. That's a power move right there.
Oh, and also, it sets up the perfect Oedipal ending to this film, doesn't it? I mean, the movie is so
God, yeah.
Oedipal. And again, to the critics, my God, did you just sleep through every class of high school AP English, or did you not take high school AP English? Because how could they have missed all these like classic themes running through this movie? I mean, it was a masterpiece, this film. Martin Scorcese was a genius in this movie.
Yeah, just read like the basic Dolores Greek myths that sort of like makes everything shiny happy, but still kind of gross.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after we get the first job, we get Amsterdam has his first fight, and we decide, okay, he's going to be in the gang. So we get another look around what 5 Point looks like, and we get a little poverty tourism.
Oh, yeah. Poverty tourism didn't start with TikTok. It definitely was a thing back then, but it was organized by evangelical Christian churches. And they would just dress up and go to 5 Points and hand out apples and tell people to
stop being poor.
Grab one of those goddamn bootstraps that has been laying on the ground and pull yourself up by it and stop being such a piece of shit. You're only poor because you're a piece of shit. So if you stop being a piece of shit, you stop being poor. And that's literally what they were saying to these people.
Oh, yeah. No, it's their own fault that they're poor, and they can just stop being poor anytime they want to. That sounds familiar.
Had nothing to do with the fact that our nation was just a bunch of rebel farmers who had stolen all of their loot and then kept stealing from each other and never giving it around to any of the people they were stealing it from.
Yeah.
There was just no Robin Hood in America to be found.
No. But we do need to introduce the rich people so we can meet people like Jenny. Like you said, she's a turtle dove. She makes her living by pretending to fit in with the rich people.
Oh, and my God, wouldn't you love to live in this house? They actually built that whole house for this set. So, like, it's an actual 19th century manor house filled with this gorgeous crown molding and these beautiful ornate window frames. And I mean, every bit of this house is gorgeous, isn't it?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, and one thing that's so clear about this, both between what Jenny, our heroine, is wearing, and then what the people in the house are wearing, and how the house looks. The way that you showed you were rich is you had more stuff than other people.
And you wore different colors, right? I mean, there were colors they could afford that poor people couldn't afford. That's really why synthetic colors democratized fashion.
Oh, yeah. So not only, and you look at everybody in 5 Points and they're just wearing plain clothes. All of their, like every single piece of clothing is one color, except for Bill the Butcher and some of his buds. They've got plaid.
So if we were to rewatch this movie, by the way, what would be like the top 3 most expensive colors? Like if we were going to look for 3 colors in this era that would identify a person as absolutely rich as shit, what would they be?
Green, not sort of olivey green, but green.
Like an emerald green?
Yeah.
Like Kelly green.
Yeah, something you look at and you went like, oh, that's green.
Irish,
because it's a color you could make, but it had to be treated very carefully. And it's less color and more, actually black was very expensive too.
Oh, was it really?
Black that didn't look all dusty was actually pretty expensive. You'll look and see that most of the people are wearing like browns and grays and sort of faded reds and faded blues. But Bill the Butcher's like lackey, he's wearing black. The cops are wearing black. So black that doesn't look all rusty.
Yep.
And black that looks very black is expensive.
All right. Yeah, because I guess at that point it was really, when you're seeing it on those people, even though with those dope yellow pants that a goofy little Irish guy was wearing, I love those pants. I want those pants so bad. But so would that yellow color have been expensive? But he did have black running.
Yellow is actually pretty cheap.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that. No, and so it's not so much color, but embroidery. If you had flowers embroidered onto whatever you're wearing, that is expensive.
Ah, all right.
Because that was all done by hand, embroidered flowers and lace.
And I know to the guys this doesn't sound like it's important at all, but like you can't even imagine how fucking hard it was to make colors back then. I watched a documentary on how they made this specific purple color, and it wasn't even from the flower petals, it was from the roots. But like they used to make lavender from orchids, and orchids are incredibly hard to grow. I mean, you basically would have to be a horticulture specialist, and they were like magicians. And so they were making these colors. I mean, so these were the things, if you're a guy in this era, these are the things that mattered to you because you were buying them. It might not seem all that interesting from the outside, but like if you're trying to put yourself in the place that in the time that you're thinking of, and like you want to imagine yourself brawling Bill the Butcher, imagine how painful the stitching is that's in your taint in these wool underpants that you're wearing, or the fact that your pants are jammed into your taint because you have suspenders pulling them up. Like the whole thing is wild. And then the different fabrics you're wearing. I mean, to us, if I'm not wearing a t-shirt material of some kind against my body, I feel like I have hay on me. And like they were actually wearing hay. It was horrific. So like I love talking about that because we don't really, without smell-o-vision and without feeling those fabrics, we can't really, but thank God we don't have smell-o-vision. And do you really want somebody like rubbing a Brillo pad against you as you're watching this film? No, but that's what they were doing.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, colors are sort of a problem because you think about how you washed your clothes. You're basically washing your clothes using converted ashes, carbolic acid.
Yeah, lye.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly caustic, so it's tearing up your clothes. And then you're beating them on rocks because they didn't have washing machines. Like, you're beating the shit out of your clothes. So even if your clothes fit when you bought them, they didn't fit after a wash because they were all fucked up from beating the hell out of them.
Right. And so that's why the rich people had their clothes, cleaned by somebody else and like spot cleaned very carefully and pressed and starched. And so again, you look, they did a great job here. Everybody in 5 Points, all of their clothes just kind of hang on them. And then as you go uptown, everybody's clothes start to stand out as in shapes that are different from the bodies underneath them. And that's partly the petticoats, or, the dudes are wearing like a linen shirt, a regular shirt, a vest, a coat, a top coat. I mean, like even the dudes are wearing 4 layers.
Yeah, and I mean, this was Martin Scorsese's baby since 1970. He was trying to make this movie, and the movie finally came out in 2002. So he really put everything he had into this, and you could see it everywhere. And like you said, the bodies were even dead on. Like most of the people in the film were small. Bill the Butcher cutting was 6 feet tall, and I think that's the same height as Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, he looked like the sketches I've seen of Bill the Butcher. Like he was a tough guy, or I've seen a picture of him, a photograph of him. There's one where he's holding like a hacksaw and he's got a top hat on. He just looks like a total badass, but like he looked like Daniel Day-Lewis, and Leo was about the same size as John Morrissey. And but most of the people in that era were small because the food was horrible and they weren't getting a lot of it, and their water was poison. And I mean, there were any number of reasons why they were injuries that were never treated with medicine. So these were not large people or terribly strong people. And I know a lot of people have it in their mind that like everybody back in the day was super tough. They were just mean as hell, and they couldn't be any other way because they had to survive.
Oh, yeah. And almost nobody was big. I mean, that's why the guys who were big stood out. Everybody was strong because they were working all the time, but a lot of them were very stringy because they kind of were starving half the time. They didn't have all the food that they wanted.
And even if they did, there were still times of famine. And
oh, yeah.
It's not like now when you can always go and get food. This was, and you could see it even into like people who lived through the Great Depression. Like they were smaller than the people who came after them because they lived through that. They starved for a couple of years during the Great Depression, possibly. So like, and you can see it in their tooth enamel and all kinds of things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things that they keep showing about Bill the Butcher is he's always got these pig carcasses around. I mean, he does use them for displaying like all these different ways of fighting, but it's that is some serious ostentation there. I can leave these pig carcasses to hang and nobody will touch them. That's how powerful he is.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that was a flex. But him just leaving those pigs hanging there was a flex because he was like, nobody's going to steal from me because I'm terrifying.
Right.
Huh, I never picked up on that. That's so cool. But yeah, I guess now because we have police, we don't realize how secure we are in our lives. But back then, everybody was stealing everything. I mean, even 50 years ago, everything was not even 50 years ago. You watch a movie from 1980 like Cannonball Run, everything was a disaster. People were doing cocaine off the dashboards of their car and driving drunk with no seatbelts. It was psychotic. And
well, and this again gets back to, you know, every era has one thing that's the new danger and is going to send us all to hell, but one thing that's consistent is the cities are dirty and nasty and dangerous and evil, and the country is clean and healthy.
Well, at least according to the Hallmark Channel. Well, I mean, good God, do they have any plot lines for the Hallmark Channel that aren't big city girl falls in love with small town boy, or big city boy falls in love with small town girl? That's the only plot they have. They have no other plot.
That's true. But, you know, they do have a point. Like, think about if you grew up in the Irish countryside, you might be starving to death, but at least when you step out of your door, there's somewhere you can walk where you're not stepping in human shit.
That's true. And that actually I don't want to give away the ending to this, to this film, but right. It speaks to that because Cameron Diaz's character, and she is horribly maligned as an actress especially in this film, and I think it's entirely unjust. But she's there because Harvey Weinstein was a rapist and did some rape shit, and he put her in the movie. He only had people like Sarah Michelle Gellar and other people like that on his list. He wasn't, even though he had Daniel Day-Lewis, who is arguably the greatest actor of our time, in the film against Leonardo DiCaprio, who's arguably the second best actor of our time. And you know what I mean? Like, he had all these amazing male actors, and then he was like, arm candy. Like, we just got to jam this lady in here because otherwise it's just going to be a sausage fest.
And he only wants to deal with women that he can manipulate. And all of these women at this point were still kind of early enough in their career, and also there was nobody you could complain to in Hollywood. And so, yeah, it was kind of a mess.
But she was amazing in it. She had a great accent. She was an Irish woman who was orphaned as a young child, and she gives her story later in the film. But then she does what you just said. Like, she's tired of stepping in human shit and wants something better for herself. So yeah, they really, I mean, this movie gets so many different plot lines into it and tells so many cool stories at once.
Yeah. Speaking of Cameron Diaz, she sort of gets her, after we get to see her, like how she makes money and how she fits in this household and how she's able to sort of traipse in and out because she's dressing the right way, we get to see the local Christian club come in and throw a dance for our poor downtrodden people.
Ah, yes. And so one thing that I think people need to know about this era is that these types of dances, it was basically these dances that were organized by churches, and going to the roller skating rink were the only two ways that men and women were going to get to spit game to each other. Am I right? That was pretty much it, unless you bumped into each other at the market.
Yeah, and pretty close. I mean, and work and sort of how you lived your life was very gendered. It was much more so if you were sort of rich and uptown. There was sort of the men's section of the house, there's the women's section of the house, and they only kind of met at meal times. And then as you sort of work your way down the social classes, women worked inside the house. They did all the cooking. They did all the cleaning. If you had to work for a living and actually make money, women had like 2.5 jobs. You could be a laundress, you could be a housemaid, or you could be a prostitute.
Or you could pretend to be a man.
You could.
Which happened. It happened out west, but I don't think it was very common in the east.
I'm sure it actually happened a fair bit, but probably less in big cities where you just had no physical privacy.
Yeah, well, I know around this time there was a mayor in Nevada who was a woman.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But she lived as a man, and nobody gave her shit about it. It was just like, yeah, that's Ted or whatever her name was. But she lived as a man. She was I mean, I guess you would call her trans by today's standards. I don't know if that's the way she felt or she had to live that way so she could, you know, be a human being. But yeah, I mean, hell, I would have strapped my tits down and been like, yep, I got a bigger dick than you and I'll fight anybody who says otherwise. There's no way I would have tried to be I wouldn't want to be a woman, period, but in any time period. But my God, any time before 20 years ago, fuck every inch of that.
Well, and it's interesting every time you get humanity where there is an issue of just sort of there's not enough people, women always attain a lot more equality. I mean, you sort of look at the population of Iceland and how the fact they've pretty much had equal rights from the beginning. They just it didn't have enough people to start saying who can't do what. And so, you're looking at Nevada. Who's going to keep order in this town? That person? Okay, that person's mayor. All right.
Yeah. I guess they have elected dogs and things as mayors out west before, so.
Yeah, but that's after orders.
I'm not trying to denigrate her position. I was just saying, like, if you were saying it was a throwaway title, I guess they did have throwaway titles.
Oh, no. I'm saying that anytime you don't have enough people, you just put the person who's best at it in charge, and you don't worry that it's a man or a woman. You're just like, I don't care who you are. I just want the person who keeps order.
Right. And life wasn't very gendered for the people at the bottom of the social order.
No.
Either, because they didn't have time for that or money for it. Everybody worked. Everybody had to do something because otherwise you'd starve. So they're at this dance. And I find it interesting that I guess I was saying that I found it interesting that Cameron Diaz was there and not working, but she was probably there working while she was dancing because she was a turtle dove and that's a pickpocket. So, which I don't think we actually explained, but she would go in and pretend to be a servant or something like that and steal from people. And then she would also steal from people on the train, the streetcar, because
the tram.
Before,
the tram or the city bus or
the light rail that we have now was just a horse-drawn carriage before. It was literally a train car, but pulled by a horse.
Yeah.
Or a team of horses.
Yeah. Okay, so we get our dance, and it is kind of fun because they do have Jenny sort of in green. So, that was something fancy. She probably got from a rag picker somewhere.
Or she stole.
Also possible. Stealing is, well, no, that's not true. If you have a big enough skirt, you can have big enough pockets so you can put a whole dress in there. That's fine. That totally works. The fact that they've got a support garment over that thin dress, that is actually much sort of more how things work. You would never have worn a corset right up against your skin. Like, that's ludicrous.
Okay. I'm looking at your face right now, and your face says it's even more ludicrous than your mouth does, and I'm thinking, how the fuck is that? Who gives a shit? But I don't understand how that's ludicrous. Can you explain for the guys who might not understand? Because we literally just showed up to watch sweaty ass Daniel Day-Lewis stab people. Like, that's what we're there for. Dead rabbits. People getting bashed. I mean, John C. Reilly is in this. We had Cal Naughton Jr. in this movie. So most guys have no idea why they should be so into Cameron Diaz's bodice. So let's discuss it.
No, because, so all the shaping garments are made basically out of jeans fabric, functionally. The kind that doesn't have any spandex in it. And so, like, having that up against your body, like, ow. And so you have all these actresses complaining about, oh, this corset was so painful. It's like, well, then it was made wrong. And so it was sort of a relief. See, like, okay, not only are they getting the dudes' clothes right, they're also getting the women's clothes right. More or less.
I will say that when you pointed out jeans without spandex, God, can you believe we lived through that nightmare? I would go to war if they tried to take spandex out of jeans. I'd go right to war. I don't give it. I will go to war with whatever weapon I have handy in my battle cats, and we will be right there at the front lines. There is no way I will ever wear clothing without spandex in it ever again.
Well, you know, we've lost the art of the gusset.
Damn that. I do know what a gusset is. A gusset is the triangular part that you put in. Yeah. I drew it in the air like people could know what the fuck I was doing. But I was drawing a triangle, but I have to have them put in my upper back because my shoulders are too broad.
It's sort of like those extra patches of fabric. Yeah, I just think about there's a famous ad, or at least to be famous, of Chuck Norris showing off these jeans with a gusset in them so you can do high kicks in them.
Oh, yeah. He used to advertise those jeans all the time. He had the tightest pants on earth.
Yeah, because he had a gusset in the crotch so he could do the high kicks.
All right, so we're back to... so she's wearing this absolutely preposterous... bodice, or the corset, yes. And so we're going to get past that because the ahistorical nature of that corset, I think, has been fully Well, maybe not
Yeah.
fully figured out, but we can maybe come back. We'll circle back.
Right. So, but
Why
yeah.
weren't they wearing hoop skirts, by the way? Weren't hoop skirts like the thing?
Oh, well, okay. Big skirts were the thing, but of course your clothes change with how much physical labor you need to do. And so one way you show you're rich, and the 19th century got way into this, especially for women, the richer you were, the more your clothes were impossible for you to put on by yourself and showed that you literally couldn't do physical labor in it. Like you were wearing clothes that didn't allow you to bend over. It didn't allow you to pick things up. It didn't allow you to do anything except like sit still or walk in tiny little steps. And so, again, you can see that as you go uptown and downtown, that the women's clothes become more or less possible for you to move in and more or less possible for you to put on yourselves. I mean, dudes' clothes were the same way. As you got richer, some of your clothing became impossible for you to get into and out of by yourself.
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine somebody trying to put clothes on me. How many punches I could throw in 30 seconds? I would set a record. God damn, somebody trying to put shoes on my feet? Like, get away from me. That would be awful. But the reason why I asked about the hoop skirts is, again, for the fellas, hoop skirts were fucking air conditioning. And I am always overheated. And so I'm watching all these people sweating and it's filthy. And I'm like, well, at least the women had the hoop skirt because you would swish your hips back and forth. And that created a little kind of fan action. So you actually cooled yourself off with a hoop skirt. And
but you can only do that if you were rich.
Oh, okay. So only rich people were allowed to be cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, all the poor people, they didn't, like, can you imagine, like, running around a kitchen with, like, hot fire and boiling grease and everything with a skirt that's standing out from your body for, like, 2 feet? No, you could really tell somebody's class by what they were wearing and how complicated it was.
You know what? I would love to take a time machine and go see the 19th century, but I wouldn't even step out of it to high five George Hackenschmidt because on the off chance that I got stuck, fuck that. No, I can't. No, I can't imagine doing any of those things. The hot grease, any of it. I couldn't imagine cooking over an open fire inside of a building made of wood. All of it was stupid. It was so stupid. It was so stupid. Just embarrassing. That's our legacy. Our legacy is stupid. It's so many.
Oh, well, you know,
people.
some stupidity lives on. This whole thing where Amsterdam gets mad at Jenny having a pass.
Oh God, yeah.
Like that is some 19-year-old shit that lives on through the ages.
Well, again, that is just to set up the Oedipal nature of the story. So he gets mad at her like a fucking incel because she used to bang Bill the Butcher because he rescued her when she was a 12-year-old orphan, and then, you know, obviously he probably was getting some, but he kept her alive, and so yeah, Harvey Weinstein found a way to inject himself probably into this film in that subplot. But it irritated me very much with Leo. It's just like, oh, you fucked him, and you fucked not. What is that guy? You fucked the guy in Office Space. When he was screaming at Jennifer Aniston.
Oh right, yeah, Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah, whatever his boss's name was.
Lundberg.
That's it. Yeah.
Bill Lundberg. No, not that one. The other one.
Yeah, it was exactly like the Lundberg. It was exactly like the Lundberg scene in the car with Jennifer Aniston.
Well, if there's one thing that this movie is about, it's about fighting. So of course, Amsterdam and Jenny get into a fight, and we cut to boxing ring, and these dudes are huge.
They are, and that is, again, the hand-to-hand combat in this film is absolutely not in any way, shape, or form historical. But yeah, they're just basically throwing haymakers at each other, and I won't get into the historical way that they fought, but because we'll talk about that in Warrior. But this was trash, and you'll see when we get to Warrior, if you guys do the watch party with us, you'll see Warrior really hits on how these guys fought, and it was amazing. But so we're gonna skip past that, and they were huge, and they were fighting.
Yeah, the fighting techniques aren't the point.
Yes.
The illegality is the point. The cops come in and bust things up because you can't have a boxing match in New York City.
Yes, and so that was an important part of the film because it touches back on the historicity of it. The fight between there was an actual boxing match between Bill the Butcher and John Morrissey, and the two of them fought under rough and tumble rules, so you were able to eye gouge and all this stuff. But they had to move. They were having a state militia chase them all over the state, and they had to keep moving venues so that they could have this fight, because the cops were always breaking up prize fights back in the day because boxing was illegal. And that's because lots of people died in boxing. It wasn't like now where some people die in boxing. It was the common to die in boxing.
So it was, people almost kind of came to see somebody die. But yeah, so this is kind of how Amsterdam makes his bones, right? He comes up with the idea of holding boxing on barges.
Yeah, and that was really true to the past. They went to great efforts to, and it was always like crossing a river. It always involved going to New Jersey or something like that.
Everything's legal in New Jersey.
Exactly. God, I love New Jersey. But so they have this fight. He wins all this. He gets all this money for Bill the Butcher, and now he's in with Bill the Butcher. His father figure is who he's becoming, and he looks at him like a father figure.
And so you're sort of like building up the tension here. You've got Amsterdam sort of rising in the ranks, and he's got this internal struggle with himself. He's like, okay, I'm with my father's killer, but I'm getting power, I'm safe, I'm climbing the ranks. You've got the Civil War spinning up, which I think is really cool. The way we all learn about the Civil War is the whole country was concentrated on it, and oh my God, these guys in 5 Points could give fuck all about the Civil War, except maybe as another thing to like have a little local brawl about.
Yeah, nobody really gave a shit. It was really Abraham Lincoln had a bug up his ass to get the South back, and he decided to get it back. I don't, for better or worse, but here we are. But yeah, so they had this draft, which was only for poor people, because you could buy your way out of it, as they show in the film, with a payment of $300. $300 at that time was it was an unthinkable amount of money for a poor person to have.
Yeah, we looked it up.
I think it was like $11,000 or something like that.
It was like $6,000. Okay. But yeah, if somebody just sort of shows up at your door and says, hey, we're taking you away to fight poorly equipped and feed you even worse than you're getting fed here, but you can buy your way out with $6,000. There are not a lot of people who can just run down to the bank and say, oh, yeah, I'll go get that No.
This was more of they showed up at the door with cops and were like, you're coming now unless you have $300 cash to hand us now. I don't even think they were giving them the option to go to the bank.
I'm just saying, even now, we couldn't, nobody could like Venmo just $6,000 from their bank account. And and they were pulling people like off the immigrant ships coming from Ireland or wherever, mainly Ireland because of the famine, and just saying, hey, welcome to America, you're enlisted now.
Yeah, or they were so Abraham Lincoln had the Emancipation Proclamation, which was specifically just to I didn't know this until Lucy Worsley told me last night. He didn't free the slaves in the United States.
Yeah.
He only freed them in the Confederate States of America. So, and that was so that the Southern economy would fall, because the entire United States economy was slavery at this time. And it was slavery. It was slavery even in northern states where they had slavery. And George Washington kept slaves illegally in Pennsylvania during his entire presidency. Like, this was a legacy of shittiness. So it wasn't about freeing the slaves. It was more about teaching Southerners a lesson, I guess.
Oh, no. It was messing up the supply lines. Because you did have paid workers working in all of the factories in the North, and you just had slaves in the South. And so basically you entirely messed up all of the supply lines in the South. It's sort of like in the Revolutionary War when the British were offering freedom to all of the slaves under American owners. It was like, let's mess up your food supply.
Yep. Yeah. And, I don't know, who knows, but it caused a backlash against black people in America, the northern states, because they were being blamed for all these people. The Irish immigrants were blaming the black people for all of their friends getting sent off to this horrible war and dying, which it had nothing to do with them, obviously, but they were getting lynched as well. So the entire movie of Gangs of New York is set against the backdrop of these draft riots, the New York draft riots.
Oh, there is one funny scene a little bit back that we jumped over, talking about how, anytime things got too rowdy, you'd sort of have a hang-in to calm things down.
Oh, yeah. Boss Tweed sends Bill Cutting to go round up 3 people to, and he has that, there's a scene where they're talking to each other, and he's saying that the people think that Tammany isn't doing anything about all this violence and all this nonsense. So we're going to have a hanging, and I need you to hang 3 or 4 people in. And so Bill looks at...
And it's like, does it need to be any big? He's like, no, nobody important. Just come up with something
but then
good.
He just looks up. He just looks up with his one eye because he's got that glass eye, and he says which because he says 3 or 4, and then I'm thinking Boss Tweed's gonna go 3. It doesn't have to be that many, but he goes 4. So they just pick 4 people at random and hang them.
And they come up the crimes they convict them of are a lot of fun.
Sneak thievery.
Yeah, the Scottish this guy's rolling out is great. Yeah, so we've got lewdness, jack rolling, which goes along with the lewdness because clearly you're rolling drunks when they go to the whorehouse. Sneak thievery.
Yeah, that's what jack rolling is, rolling drunks at the whorehouse.
Yeah, you've got chloral hydrating, so, doing the roofies, there is always a way to do that.
Yeah.
Chloral hydrate's right up there with laudanum and ether. And then, of course, we get into the serious ones.
Chloral hydrate's the original date rape drug.
There you go. You've got sodomy and strangulation, unclear which one's worse, and enthusiastic encouragement of public corruption.
Enthusiastic corruption of the... What was enthusiastic corruption of the what?
An enthusiastic encouragement of public corruption.
Oh, enthusiastic encouragement of corruption. Yeah. He really rolled the shit out of that R. I love that guy.
But yeah, that's the way they would calm down the crowds. Yeah, let's have a hang.
You would have given it a real Barnum feel. And we had Barnum in that film. I mean, this movie had everything. It was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, we get Horace Greeley and P.T. Barnum, and they both sort of matter because pulling people off the boats and saying, hey, welcome to America, you are enlisted. You've got a lot of angry people, and Boss Tweed and Horace Greeley are like, well, you've got all of this passion running around. Maybe we can focus it in a useful direction for our own purposes.
Horace Greeley, correct, he was the newspaperman who was the father of yellow journalism. Do I have that right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. He was, yellow journalism, muckrakers.
So this guy was the original bullshit artist. He was the fake news master of the 19th century.
Right. I mean...
this guy was, better than any Russian bot you ever met.
Oh yeah. In his own way, he was definitely kind of Rush Limbaugh and
Rupert Murdoch, yeah,
Alex Jones combined.
And so he's teamed up with Boss Tweed too. So they're like the fucking evil alliance. Those two, just scumbaggery at its most unbelievable and corpulent.
Right. Instead of people showing up and saying, hey, you said you were going to clear our trash out. Hey, you said, you were going to cut down on crime. It's like immigrants. They're like, oh, immigrants. We'll go beat up the immigrants.
Yeah. It's amazing. That playbook is still working somehow. I don't get it. Jesus, we gave up on the fucking wishbone offense in football 80 years ago, but they're still going with the same playbook in the Republican Party. It makes no sense.
Well, no. We've moved on from, immigrants, schmimmigrants, but we'll really commit some mayhem over trans people or drag shows or whatever. That's where we need to get our anger on. But, speaking of people dressing up and performing, we get Uncle Tom's Cabin coming to the stage.
Before we do that, though,
yeah?
Wasn't it interesting that the nativists were totally nonplussed by the he-she's? It wasn't, they were just like, oh yeah, they exist, they pay us tribute, they're part of the Bowery Boys.
They pay us tribute, that's the key.
Yeah, but the trans, I guess the LGBTQ community just needs to render unto Caesar so that the Republicans play nice, huh?
No, because, now that we don't hate Russia anymore, we have to have a target.
We don't? What, did they have a coup?
Well, I'm just saying the Republicans don't hate Russia anymore.
Oh, no, they certainly don't.
Yeah.
Wow, they could pull a Yui like nobody else.
I was like, wow. Yeah, so that play was really fun, and when I was watching that, I'm sitting there going, okay, are those women on stage or are those dudes dressed as women? I had to think through that.
There were a lot of famous women actresses at the time, and especially out of New York. So I think they were probably women.
Yeah, yeah. In the big bad city, you definitely had women playing women on stage.
But I think that the theatrical performance was probably pretty dead on, to, with the exception of the fruits and vegetables they threw.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Yeah, no, the way it was, the lighting, the way they were doing the special effects. I mean, I was getting flashbacks to the Tales of Baron Munchausen and the way they did the theatrics there and had all the crank things and the special effects and the way the waves worked. I mean, oh no, that was beautiful.
Well, that's neat. You know, I'd never actually seen the Baron Munchausen, so I am not certain of what you're talking about. Maybe we'll have to put that on the list of movies to review.
Okay, that's a fun, stinky, greasy, fantastical movie, but it definitely lives in much more in the world of fantasy than even this does. The other thing they get right is, people came to plays not entirely to watch the plays. They also went to plays just to get together and be rowdy.
Oh, yeah. And so this crowd is rowdy as shit. And I think, again, that's probably pretty accurate because it wasn't just a crowd that was drunk as shit at this time. The actors were crazy drunk. The most famous actor of the day was the father of the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, who in this film is being portrayed by a man who's like hanging by a rope on stage. And so Junius Booth was the father of John Wilkes Booth, and he was a notorious violent drunk who would fight his co-actors on stage all the time. He was a he would climb up into the rafters with a bottle and just scream shit from the rafters while they were trying to do the play. He was a lunatic. So and he was the best that America had in acting. Literally, he was Leonardo DiCaprio of the day, and that's how he acted. So, I think this was maybe toned down compared to how it was in the day.
Oh, yeah, well, so I guess you go to a play not necessarily for the story, but how entertaining it's going to be.
It was way more like Rocky Horror Picture Show, I think.
Right. And there's even the food throwing, which was people throwing stuff at the stage. Totally accurate. Get that. But I was cracking up at the green fluffy lettuce and those nice firm tomatoes that they were throwing.
Oh, yeah, because... So, and I've written about this. I'm sure you have talked about it on the show as well. That in this era, they never put out at a grocer. They never put out unripe fruit. They would only put out or vegetables. They would put it out once it was already ripened. And they had no refrigeration, which meant they had a day before the shit started to go rotten.
Right? Yeah, you just go shopping.
So they would have been throwing the most rotten food that they couldn't eat, and they were fucking starving. So this was. They were being pelted with literal garbage, out of a dumpster behind a restaurant. So add that to the sense of methane is all over everything. Nobody's bathed in weeks. And then everybody's got dysentery. Everybody's got parasites. So their asses are unwashed.
Cholera here, yeah. Ringworm. Great.
Yeah, and then you're adding that. So it's unreal, the time period. My God, this time.
And, so it erupts into chaos. There's an assassination attempt on Bill the Butcher. Bill the Butcher's not standing for that and absolutely just messes this guy up.
This is the one that's thwarted by our hero, Leo, who saves his father figure. Now he is conflicted as hell.
The moment that totally popped me out of it though is when the villain is lying down on the ground and there's extra stuff being thrown at him. There's a banana on the floor and I'm like, no, because there are no bananas in North America until 1870.
Oh my God! And this film was in 1863, and so was
right.
Oh, was it wearing anything over its corset? That's what we need to know about this banana.
Yeah.
But that's practically the only historically inaccurate thing in this film.
But I was just like, no. But unlike the tomatoes and lettuce and whatever, sure, fine, whatever, that was everywhere. I'm like, bananas would have been expensive. There would have only been bananas uptown.
And the bananas would have looked a lot different. This modern banana strain has only existed since the last banana plague. There's something with bananas. They have plagues periodically, and it wipes out a strain of bananas. But there's 400 strains of bananas.
Yeah, our banana hygiene sucks. Yeah. Oh, well, there's drawings of them and
Oh,
whatnot, and I'm sure and yeah, we're late enough that there's even
oh,
photographs. Yeah, this was the thing that was blowing my tiny little mind when I was doing some research is you can find actual photographs of people who fought in the Revolutionary War
what? How?
when they're old, when they're in their like
Oh,
80s
okay. I
and
was like,
90s. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying like while they were fighting. No, 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 no. Let's not be ridiculous. But photography happened early enough is you get some of these guys when they're in their like 80s and
When
90s.
did daguerreotypes start? Like the 1840s?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, shit.
Yeah.
That's
So
wild.
we definitely have photographs of those old bananas.
Well,
Not color, but
daguerreotypes. I know
yeah.
this is a stupid sidebar, but daguerreotypes blow my mind. For anybody who doesn't know what a daguerreotype is, it's the earliest type of photography, and they did it on a silver plate. And there is it took a really long time to take a photograph, but there's so much detail in these photographs that now that they're polishing them, they're able to. I mean, it's like a gigapixel doesn't even begin to describe the level of resolution. Like they're looking at a picture of a woman who's like, or a picture of a factory that's a mile away, and they can see what a woman is doing in a window in this fucking factory. Like you can barely see the window on the picture, and they can see in the picture in the window. Like it's crazy. It's like you can almost see into the past with a daguerreotype.
Do you know why the resolution's that good?
Why?
Is it basically
Oh, science teacher, tell us.
unlike with pixels, you are basically have resolution down to more or less the molecular level.
Ooh.
Because it's
So
literally
that's the closest thing we have to a time machine is that right there.
yeah. So if you have a really good silver plate of really high quality, the silver particles in the gel that was on the glass plate were like really, 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 really fine. The way they're darkening and lightening with the chemical on it, that chemical on the silver particles in the gel are like down to the molecular level. That's why you can zoom in at like that insane depth.
That's crazy. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So again, the 19th century is so crazy. They also invented the fax right around this time and the telegraph, and like they invented the fax around this time. So to your parents who are still using the fax, slap them because what the fuck are you doing? Pull yourself together. Like have some dignity.
Oh, we are totally doing all the different movies around the Pony Express, man.
Okay, I'm down. I didn't even know that. I didn't know
that
there
were
was
killed
one.
off. That were killed off by the telegraph. But think about all the different TV shows and movies about the Pony Express. I mean,
It only existed for 7 years or something, right?
yeah, that's the crazy
And half
thing.
of the Pony Express was the telegraph. They telegraphed it to the Continental Divide.
St.
Like,
Joseph.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
there you go. Yeah.
because they always call it St. Joe's.
Yeah. So it was what a 10-day ride from St. Joseph, Missouri, was it? And then to California.
Yeah, it was from the Missouri River, basically St. Louis, and then to San Francisco, because there wasn't anything else important on the West Coast.
We know altogether too much about this time period. Holy shit.
Okay, so yeah, we have our banana debacle at the play.
Oh, that debacle.
And
So are you ranking this banana debacle above or below the unspeakable horror of the corset?
oh no, the banana is worse because there's like a long history of bad costuming. There's no excuse for the banana thing.
Well, we are going to have to let that props person know. We will send them an email.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
strongly worded email.
Like a PA just showed up with like a big old box of produce and they're like, yeah, sure. Okay, fine. It was sort of like I was listening to the critique of some Star Trek and they were talking about how, oh, no. It was another TV show, but there was a scene where people were grilling chicken, but the chicken on the grill in the shot was fried chicken.
That's great.
So yeah, like the production assistant, like the intern just showed up with the wrong chicken. They're like, fuck it, it's weekly television. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, so people love picking apart these old shows and like trying to draw this meaning out of it. It's like they were on meth and slapped it together at the last second, sweaty, trying not to look hungover. Like they're doing way too much. They're being so extra.
Yeah. Okay, so we are into the second half of the film. Leo's on top, or
Here we go.
Amsterdam's on top. You know, he's with Jenny. He's saved the big boss, and now he's got a nice hat. You can tell because it's tall. And,
Is that a mark of a nice hat?
well, yeah, because you think about, like, if you're poor, you're wearing the soft hat. If you're an important dude who doesn't have to work so hard, you can have a nice tall hat. And it's a tall hat made out of fur. There's a couple of different scenes in here. You'll see dudes with top hats, but when they zoom in on them, they're actually made of wicker.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that at the very beginning. And I think I mentioned it to you that
Yeah.
I'd never noticed that before, but it's really dark wicker. But it makes sense. That would be much cooler to put on your head. I mean, it would be uncomfortable just like on wicker chairs, which look like the most great idea until you sit in one and you're like, I hate everyone who's ever existed.
Yeah, but at this point, you know, comfort schmumfort, nobody's comfortable in their clothing. You know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to ask
Yeah.
you this because it's timely for me, and it's regarding the clothing. The
Yeah.
shoes, because I have a pair of Air Force Ones, and anybody who has a pair of Air Force Ones knows this. They pinch on your left toe, and so you end up walking funny. But you look so goddamn good I walk a lot that I gave myself plantar fasciitis from walking in a pair of modern shoes. And so how these shoes must have been unspeakable. I mean, they didn't even have socks, so they were, at best they had foot wraps, right? But did they have foot wraps?
Again, it's a class thing.
Boots without socks. Oh my God. What? Oh God.
I mean, so they're leather, and so they're gonna fit to your feet. You could definitely get you could knit socks. Knitting socks was a thing people did. If your mother loved you, she knit you socks.
And
if
how
you
do
were
the Russians not have socks and they have foot wraps?
oh,
What's going on in
well,
Russia?
because
Jesus,
you know they're
those
the
people.
military and they've got shit and they're just cutting people's shirts off them.
Okay, that's another sidebar. My God, the Russians. All right, you know what? At any point in time, it's always way worse in Russia. So there's that for America.
Yeah, and so the whole thing with silk stockings is, you know, you get the silk yarn, silk thread, and you know your servant.
This is for very, very rich. This is for Horace Greeley.
Yes.
And Boss Tweed. They're wearing silk socks.
They are definitely wearing silk
What
socks.
kind of socks would Leo be wearing then? Would Leo be wearing socks?
If he was wearing socks, he'd be wearing wool ones, or you know, he'd just be wearing leather shoes that had completely like fit to his feet, and so.
Unless Cameron Diaz stole him a pair of silk socks, which is possible.
That's possible. That is definitely something you could like slip into your skirt pockets for sure.
All right. Oh, but so their feet must have been killing them on top of everything else is where I'm going with this. Because their shoes couldn't have fit. Like their shoes didn't fit, right?
Well, they didn't fit, but on the other hand, they're natural leather, so they're going to mold to their feet.
So they were just like gauchos and they would just slap wet leather on their feet and just be like, well, when that dries, that's my shoe.
Well, think about it. Like not quite that much, but you know, you
but
think
almost.
about yeah, to
Jesus,
a certain extent.
These people were living like savages.
You know, over time, your foot sweat, and it's gonna mold to your feet. And also, you know, their shoes get wet as they're like walking through whatever. But this is why people took off their shoes when they went into other people's houses.
Because they live in the worst part of town. And you can see him in the background. There's a barber surgeon there, so that guy's throwing out blood from bloodletting. And hair and all that shit's in the street. And then you'll have a butcher nearby and he's throwing all the blood and offal in the street.
And the grocer. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So all that's getting on your nice boots that are molded to your feet that don't have socks on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
God, this is the worst. I would never get out of that time machine. Never. Not for 1 second.
Yeah. So Leo is riding high here. He's super conflicted. And he's like, you know what? I'm not sure how I feel about it. And Bill the Butcher can tell that Amsterdam's wavering. So what does he do? He goes after Jenny.
Always. They always do.
And, you know, he's got a nice manic episode going on. He's throwing knives in the Chinese club. That singer she's doing her damnedest to like, the show must go on. I mean, that Chinese club is gorgeous.
And they built that thing from the ground up too. So that was a whole Chinese theater that they built they had in big towns there with a significant Chinese population. They would have Chinese theaters and they were built in a traditional Chinese way. So this was basically like could have been transported from Beijing and and it's in, well, it was built in Rome, but like, so it's in New York. And that's the
Yeah.
setting for this set piece where Leonardo DiCaprio is planned with the Chinese people who run the theater to kill Bill the Butcher. And Bill the Butcher finds out about it because the dickhead, the E.T. kid, he's a dickhead, and he keeps waffling because he's an orphan. And it's understandable. Like, the orphans at the time, he's a rowboat awash at sea. And he doesn't even have an oar. So he's just stuck.
Right.
And he has to go wherever the waves take him. And he keeps trying to pick a side, but he keeps picking opposing sides and picking wrong. So he tells Bill, hey, Leo's going to kill you. And Bill the Butcher at first doesn't believe him, is going to cut his head off. Like, he's pissed. Because Bill loves Leonardo DiCaprio like a son. And again, it's setting up this amazing Oedipal thing. And Daniel Day-Lewis is at his best at the end of this film when he is full, raging, sweaty, greasy psychopath. This is when he's in his screaming glory. And yeah, I love the end of this movie.
Yeah, so yeah, you totally got the setup where Bill the Butcher is showing off his knife-throwing prowess, and it's like, how's this gonna go down? And so he is trying to provoke Amsterdam. You know, Bill the Butcher's a brawler. He wants this fight to happen. He's like, enough dancing around, enough stress. Like, let's
Yeah.
go. He's pushing Amsterdam's buttons, trying to make this thing happen. And of course, he does it by threatening Jenny, who's kind of this piece of meat between the two of them.
Yeah, well, that's everybody's criticism about this film. But again, Harvey Weinstein fucked this film up, and Daniel Day-Lewis did this movie in spite of Harvey Weinstein. But yeah, I'm sure that was Harvey Weinstein's influence, was to make the damsel in distress the ultimate, crux of, it's the boiling point of this. It's where it boils over. I mean, it could have been any other thing, but of course, Cameron Diaz had to be the damsel in distress.
Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, there's a lot of truth to it. Cameron Diaz getting to have a say in, whether she wanted to end up with one or the other or neither of them was more or less unthinkable at this point in history.
Oh, you're right. And I was harping on.
No! Don't apologize. It's layers.
Oh yes,
it's all of
but I was
these
just going to say that
time.
when I'm thinking about even the badass women of that era, like the ones who were beating up men, every one of them had a manager husband who beat the shit out of them every day. And I mean, that even happened up to Christy Martin in the 80s. Like, it was just, even the most badass woman who could do anything, with the exception of one woman, like Sandwina, she was the only one who didn't get her ass kicked by a man and wasn't basically a hostage her entire life. So I guess my statements about Harvey Weinstein might have been, I might have been putting too much Harvey Weinstein into that scene.
Oh, no, I mean, it's sort of all true because America is basically under British law. Women had no ability to keep money on their own. So the only way to have any money that you could carry around for any length of time was to have a man fronting for you. So there were plenty of women who ran businesses, but they couldn't own them because only men could sign contracts, only men could have bank accounts. Women
only white men, because that
Very
comes
true,
into play. That comes into play when we get into Warrior, right?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's not only that it was men; it was only white men.
Yeah,
and over time, who got to be white will shift. That's a moving target as well. Because at this point, the Irish aren't particularly white. The Italians are definitely not white.
Definitely not white. Yeah. The Spanish would not be considered white.
No, and a lot of Eastern Europeans weren't considered white.
And then it went to your lineage. And then it changed into the location in the country you were. And then even up in Canada, it changed even more. So, like, they had... were you 100% black, 75% black, 25% black, or 0% black, basically. And that, like, determined your status and your ability to, like, own land and things of that nature. But it changed from place to place.
Oh, what tax rates you probably had to pay, whether or not you were allowed to vote, where you could live in town, what rates you got on your loans.
Yeah, so there was so much nuance in this. And then again, it goes back to those critics who are complaining about the nuance in this film and how there's no plot to it because it's just about everything. And it's like, there was so much shit going on. You can't tell nobody was just doing one thing at this time because the world was exploding. Like, when the telegraph happened, the world melted down. It was like the internet, when the internet first hit the scene.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. I mean, between the telegraph and the railroad, suddenly the ability to communicate was sped up like 100 times.
It's actually exactly like now. We have space and the internet, and those two things are exactly. I mean, we're just right there. It's the same. We're going through the same tumult and the same. That's why I think this period is so important for people to discuss, and I'm so glad we are, because everybody else sleeps on it. They just don't know how cool it is.
This is so reflective of what's going on. Sort of, how do we divide up the people in the world? They're deciding it now. How do we communicate, and what do we communicate, and what do we decide is important to us? I mean, yeah, this is another period of tumult, just like we're going through now. Absolutely.
And so they have the fight, right? And it's it's so so Bill the Butcher just smashes Leo down, and then he's on top of it. He gets in a full mount position, and he goes, what does he say? I'm not going to, or no, he just starts headbutting him. And at the end of it, he's like, you're not so pretty anymore, or something like that. But when he's headbutting him, he's rearing back up and using his entire body to headbutt Leo in the face. It's the most brutal headbutting scene ever. It's gnarly.
The suspense before he does that is like one of the worst moments for me when I was watching this movie for the first time.
It's like going to the top of a roller coaster when you're doing the chuck, 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 chuck. Because he's
standing
like
over them with his knife, and he's just like yelling out to the crowd, like, what do you want? Which chop do you want? The heart, the liver. And I was like, I barely could hold it together.
He was such an amazing showman in that. And I think it was probably true to Bill the Butcher's character in real life, because the man was a lunatic, and he had to be larger than life in that film. And the quote that Bill the Butcher has in that about that's how you preserve the order of things, fear. That is how people did things in that era. It seems like, at least in New York and 5 Points.
Oh, well, I mean, the bigger the crowd gets, the more extreme your tactics have to be to become the thing that everybody is going to focus on. Because, in any group of people, you probably have several good storytellers. And so, the one that can get the most eyeballs, they become the one with the most power. And New York was, one of the biggest, especially at this point.
And that's how Donald Trump became president.
Bingo. Yeah. Oh. This was just the most brutal thing. I was completely freaking out about it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, and it was probably, the beating that he gave Leo in that movie was probably not as bad as the beating that John Morrissey got in real life. It was apparently, I mean, he almost died. And so the reason, I just want to give this little bit because it's fun. Where it diverges is, Bill the Butcher died in 1855, which was 8 years before this film was set, but they wanted to, put it all together. But the reason was because right after Bill the Butcher and John Morrissey fought, and they fought under rough and tumble rules, and so he was getting fish hooked and eye gouged, and he broke a bunch of his bones and stuff. 3 weeks later, John Morrissey and 3 of his friends showed up at the bar, and John Morrissey walked up, tried to shoot him in the face, and his gun misfired, and his friend shot him and killed him. And so his last words, Bill the Butcher's last words, were actually in the movie, and I won't give him away just yet. But
yeah, because he does say him at the end.
But so he lived like 7 days and then died, even though he'd been shot in the chest. And this was something that incels talked about decades later, because H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, who were H.P. Lovecraft is like the god of weird horror, and Robert E. Howard is the Conan author. These two incels were writing each other all the time, and Robert E. Howard said that he would have paid $10, which it would be like $200 now, to have seen that fight in real life, because it was so brutal, and they idolized Bill the Butcher so much. So he was really like a badass pop culture figure. And that's why I don't think there was I think he did the bombast right, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you're at a theater and people are there for a show. And so if it's not going to be the show that they came for, he gives them another one for sure. And
it was almost like a Roman gladiator type thing, where he's looking to the crowd and looking at, but he is the emperor. So he's the emperor and the gladiator.
Yeah.
And he lets Leo live because he wants him to live with his shame, and so he can come back and fight him when he's strong.
Yeah. So we get almost like a return to the beginning of the movie. I mean, Leo's back underground, weak as a baby.
He's got the most multicultural crew on Earth, and they have that really bizarre scene where that little horrible little Irish man with the ears sticking out starts screaming, "There's an N-bomb in the church! There's an N-bomb in the church!"
Yeah.
And the priest knocks him the fuck out.
Because once Amsterdam sort of gets over his injuries, because boy, they were bad. He calls everybody in, because even though Bill the Butcher is the baddest motherfucker in town, a lot of people are getting sick with his craziness, and they're like, we got to work together to take him down. So yeah, they get him together, and anytime you pull together a coalition, there's always going to be people who hate the other people in the group. And so yeah, Leo's trying to pull it together, and some of the Irish are like, yeah, but even though I hate Bill the Butcher and I want to take him down, I don't want to take him down with these people.
Yeah. And they even they briefly touched on, there was a movement to get an Irish enforcer elected as the sheriff in New York City, so that they could actually have a bit of order. And at that time, all of the lawmen, all the guys you're thinking of as lawmen, like Wyatt Earp and all those people that were out west and acting like sociopaths, those people were all vicious criminals who switched sides so that they didn't get hung and became lawmen. So this is not uncommon for the Brendan Gleeson, the priest in this character. Or what was his name? It was Priest, right?
Yeah, Monk.
Monk
Was the sheriff.
Monk.
Yeah.
And he had this badass shillelagh.
Oh,
and
jeez. That is a weapon.
Yeah, and that guy was based on a real character, and he was like just this murderous thug in the Irish mob who became a sheriff, and then he was killed by Bill.
He's killed by Bill the Butcher in the movie. Who knows who he was?
Yeah.
But again, it was sort of, Bill the Butcher has gotten out of control, so we're going to get all these people together. The vote fixing definitely went on. You had both sides trying to suppress each other's voting for the sheriff. And you've also got the Irish, voting multiple times with different beards and mustaches and clothes and whatnot. But yeah, they do manage to get their guy elected. And so Bill the Butcher is like, well, we can't have that. And so, yeah, he just completely kills him.
The one thing I wanted to add about the Monk character is that if they had used the real life guy, the look of the real life guy, he looked like it would have been like, "Meow, you're never gonna catch me, copper." Meow. And he was a genuinely dangerous man, but he was also like the guy who kept the Italian mafia from doing anything until they finally did, because he died.
Oh, okay.
He was I was a little disappointed with the way he died, because he was such a badass in the film, and then he turned his back on Bill the Butcher and got the hatchet thrown in his back, and it's like, what are you doing turning your back on Bill the Butcher? You're a psychopath. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, we're gonna have to definitely.
I know that was probably something that would happen in real life, but it just disappointed me. I was disappointed in Brendan Gleeson.
Yeah, sometimes you're like, why did this happen? It's like, so the story can happen.
Yes, yes, I know. Thanks, Mom.
But yeah, that was definitely one of those. So yeah, Boss Tweed is also kind of tired about the Irish getting all uppity and electing their own sheriff. So he and Bill the Butcher get together again, take on the Irish, and stop all of this democracy that's going on. Because Boss Tweed can't continue to do what he's doing if people are actually voting for who they want to vote for.
Yeah, if they're not getting stabbed on their way to their on the way to the ballot box.
Yeah, so Boss Tweed goes and he says, all right, Bill the Butcher, you got to get this stuff under control. You got to bring everybody to heel again. I guess, you can only hang people so many times to get things under control. We're getting kind of towards the end here. We sort of hit that one peak of drama in the middle, but we're going to have to go for one last push in the Civil War. So now we've got Bill the Butcher kind of working with Boss Tweed. All right, we got to put down these Irish. We've got to, run the draft so we can finish off this war. We've got to get New York City under control. It's a mess. So all of these things are coming together. So,
and I know that might seem crazy, because what the hell does this mayor have to do with all of that? Like, what does he have to do with the draft? Like, a mayor wouldn't have anything to do with a draft. But Tammany Hall was actually what they called a political machine at the time. So
Right.
it wasn't so much like Tammany Hall wasn't City Hall, but it was what ran the government, if that makes sense. It was the locus. It was basically a government by mafia. And they had them all around the country. So, like, there was one in Chicago, there was one in New Orleans, and then there was one in New York. There's probably one in Philadelphia, too. But, yeah, so go ahead. I just wanted to fill people in because, to me, as I was watching the movie, and, you're seeing this fat guy in a room with a ton of birds, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? And what does he have to do with the draft? Like, why would a mayor even do that?
Well, and at this point, there's not national communication. It's sort of like every town sort of, picks their fighter, and then they go to, the county level, and then they go to the state level. And, now we sort of have everybody who runs for president now starts out as a national candidate. This is really different than it used to be. Each region of the country would show up with their candidate, and it was like, okay, this is the candidate from the South, this is the candidate from New England, this is the candidate from farm country, this is the candidate from the West Coast, and that's who would fight it out at the national conventions. So if you could have your candidate from your area, you had the most power in the presidency. So yeah, no, Boss Tweed is just trying to get his guy to the highest position he can get it to.
And the reason for that was graft. They would, like the Brooklyn Bridge, for instance, the only reason that it was erected, it wasn't to facilitate travel. It was because Boss Tweed got a ton of money by stealing it from the government for, like, funding this project. So that's what they did, and that's why they were trying to get their hands in all this, and why they were trying to get, because they were probably getting kickback out of that $300 for the draft.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, people were greasing palms. They weren't just greasy because everything was oily and shitty. They were greasy because they were greasing palms. That's how shit got done. And again, it was literally like America was like Somalia back then. And so when you're thinking of we're coming up on America's centennial, and it was like, like, who fucking cares? Nobody gave a shit. And we had just got done with a civil war nobody gave a shit about. And we got done being crappy about fixing the country after it.
But yeah, so right now we're coming up on sort of the last big push to kind of end the Civil War. We've got to draft all of these people to run it, and this is sort of where everything's going to come together for the end of the movie. You've got the draft coming together. You've got Horace Greeley out there with his backers writing up stories to say, come fight for the war, defeat those ugly sons of bitches down in the South, be patriotic. But on the other hand, screw the foreigners. They should go to fight if they love this country so much. They gotta
let the blacks fight if they want their freedom. Shit like that. Yeah, a lot of tough love. Well, they gotta if they want.
If you want to move into this country, you gotta fight for it first. Off the ship and into the army.
Yeah, but they were doing the same shit back then. It's still it's the same playbook. But so these riots are starting, and people are starting to lynch black people. And there's a guy with that old timey radio voice, but they're showing it via telegraph, and they're narrating all these events via telegraph, which was really cool because it's showing you a telegraph, because most people have never seen a telegraph. So that thing that they're tapping away on, that's a telegraph.
Yeah, so that's how they're spreading the information around the city, because otherwise you have to have
internet.
People...
That's the internet 1.0.
Right, and that's where we get to see P.T. Barnum, because one of the things they do is they break into P.T. Barnum's museum / zoo / headquarters, and there's elephants running around New York City.
Yeah, and that was actually pretty close to the time that a fire burned down P.T. Barnum's museum, and they mentioned that P.T. Barnum's museum is burning down. And I don't know if the museum burnt down in the draft riots, but the reason why we got the Barnum and Bailey circus started with that museum burning down. It was a really central, like, popular attraction in New York City, and it was a cool place to go. It was kind of like it was a combination of a historical museum with a zoo, and then like all that ahistorical goofy stuff like mermaids and whatever. So it was a little bit of a freak show, but it was a neat place. Yeah. And then it burned down, and the story was horrible. All the animals died awfully.
Oh. Yeah, we'll have to look into Hugh Jackman and The Showman and P.T. Barnum. He's a whole story in himself.
I'm not going to watch that movie until, because I can't go through the animals toys.
Yeah. No. I don't know how much that movie is about the animals. I think it's more about the people. But yeah, one of the wildest parts about that riot is you actually have the Navy shelling the city.
Yeah, I didn't actually look into the historicity of that, but I'm sure it was probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, some version of that I'm sure happened. And at different times, New York City has been shelled.
Yeah, that is true. And that's pretty amazing, though. We're in the middle of a war with ourselves, and then we're also fighting ourselves again on top of that.
Yeah.
And then, so inside of that war, inside of a war, you have Leo's war against Bill the Butcher. And so Leo's got this multicultural alliance. It's pretty cool. It's like the badass women led by
Hellcat,
Hellcat Maggie, who's this real life woman who she had filed her teeth down to fangs, and like she used these like Wolverine style claws on her fingers to cut people up. She was a fucking badass. And so she's leading all these people, and there's all Africans, and everybody is in there, and they're all fighting for Leo's cause. And they've been true to real life. The opposite, they did the opposite of what Bill the Butcher did. Because Bill the Butcher and Tammany Hall had a falling out, Tammany Hall switched sides and allied with the Irish, which is what happened in real life. And so that's how the Irish mob got started, which eventually became the Italian mob. All of those guys are fighting Bill the Butcher's nativists inside of the draft riots, which are inside of the Civil War.
Yeah, and all we ever hear about is the Civil War, and yet so much of why the country is the way it is today is all of these little fissures that we don't know about. All of this stuff that we were doing to each other, not knowing about this stuff is why we're still beating each other up over the same stuff now.
Yeah, and and the alliances, again, even within that tiny war within a war, were so weird because Bill the Butcher was allied with the Plug Uglies, they spoke Gaelic. They were all like fresh off the boat from Scotland or Ireland or wherever, and they were crazy, violent war derby stuffed with rags. But he was fighting alongside the Irish against the Irish. The whole thing was crazy. It was just so wasteful. But but it was a great set piece backdrop for this battle.
Oh yeah, and in its own way, we end up where we started. There's definitely that sense of futility. There's a grand death at the beginning, and everybody's just sort of left with a mess. Yep. And at the end, Bill the Butcher, there's a grand death at the end in the same mess. That's the mess that is Gangs of New York. There's a lot in there. It almost feels like he should have made a couple of movies on this.
Yeah, this podcast was dense and long, but that film was dense and long. It's 3 hours long. And, I mean, I loved the movie, but a lot of people wished it had been shorter, and I don't feel like it could have been.
I think that'll sort of be able to tease out all of 101 things that got all shoved in here. But I was going to say, I don't know a lot about how movies are made, but sometimes you only have one chance to make a movie. So it looks like he's sort of shoved everything in there in case this is his only shot.
It's funny you mention that because he is. Martin Scorcese is making a Gangs of New York TV show, I believe, for HBO Max. So we are going to get that.
All right. Well, let's wrap up Gangs of New York, our first whack at the 19th century, and we'll come back at it from the other coast.
Oh, but we failed to. So at the beginning I was talking about Cameron Diaz and about how she came from Ireland, and then you were saying like how you would go outside and step in shit and kind of look to go see something better. And so she had planned to take a steamship which was a brand new technology as well, to San Francisco. It had just been built. It was 12 years old at that time, San Francisco. She even shows him on the map that the steam trip, the trip takes 3 weeks. Is it 3 weeks?
She says 3 weeks. In reality, it's going to be a lot longer. But yeah, so she has to take a boat from New York to the Panama Isthmus. They walk across or take wagons across the isthmus, and then
or donkeys or something.
Yeah, and then they go up the other side because at this point,
but they walk through the jungle.
Yes.
The untamed, malaria-filled crazy ass leopards jumping out of trees, jungle filled with boa constrictors jungle. This was not taking a pleasure cruise. So the other option was they could go around the Cape of Good Horn, which took like what, 3 to 6 months?
Oh yeah, Cape Horn, and then you have to go through that mixing bowl ocean around Antarctica.
Yeah, you might die.
Yeah,
you might die.
You might die. Yeah, it depends on what time of year.
You might die. So you'd get to San Francisco eventually.
Yeah.
But so she tries to get Leo to go with her, and right before this Titanic battle, and he says no.
He's got to fight.
Yeah, and he just, which is so ridiculous because, and I'm sure you're yelling at him as a 40-year-old me. I'm yelling at him. Of course, 25-year-old me was like, "Yeah, get out of the way, bitch! I gotta go kill people." But thank God I'm not a 25-year-old idiot anymore. But like, get your ass on that fucking steamship.
If we can survive our 20s. But she didn't even make it
to the steamship, which was the most tragic part. Oh God, that was so tragic. So she's going through the riots, and she makes it almost to the ship. She's on the dock, and then she gets beat down, and all her shit gets stolen, and I don't know if she dies or what.
I mean, that is sort of how the movie just keeps going. Like, everybody has plans, everybody gets almost to everything that they want, and then boom, they get ruined one way or another.
Yeah, it's kind of like the 19th century for America. It was like almost, but not quite. Instead of shooting at each other, maybe you should have built sewers. Yeah, I'm just throwing out ideas. Like, maybe fight cholera first before you fight each other.
And this is the crazy thing. Like, city planning was not a thing that was something people did in America at all, because they'd all come from small towns, or if they'd come from a big city, they were an incredibly poor person who had no power in a big city. So yeah, city planning is just not a thing that happened.
Yeah, Washington, D.C. was the only one, and it was barely there at this point. It was just a drained swamp, and I mean, the White House had been burned down once already. It wasn't like it is today. Like, Teddy Roosevelt in the 1904 used to swim naked in the Potomac he'd go running and then go swimming naked in the Potomac every morning. The President of the United States would swim naked in the Potomac every morning. So it was a different time. And this was 40 years before that.
Well, you wouldn't want to wear a swimsuit. They were made of wool.
He was Teddy Roosevelt. He just, he was probably up to some weird shit.
I'm just saying most people swim naked. The naked part wasn't the crazy part. It was the Potomac part.
It's just the idea of the President of the United States. I mean, I see, because I bought into it because I'm an American man, and I had all this Teddy Roosevelt propaganda shoved down my throat. Sure. I was like, he was the man. But, I mean, it was cool. Like, he had the heavyweight boxing champion of the world that would come box with him, and he'd wrestle all these heavyweight champs, and like, he was kind of this rough and tumble guy, but like, most of the story was bullshit. I'm way off on a sidebar, but this era always gets me talking about Teddy Roosevelt somehow.
How do we want to wrap this one up so we set ourselves up to start Warrior?
See, this is amazing because we talked about Jenny is taking the steamship to San Francisco, and also in real life, John Morrissey he has established himself in America as an Irish immigrant, as a boxing champion in the camps, in the mining camps in San Francisco. See, he was a genuine badass, but he did the new style of Queensberry rules boxing, so he was unprepared for Bill the Butcher. But so now we're going to shift next time to the TV show Warrior. Because we could go minute by minute through that show.
Now, I think we'll be better served by sort of going episode by episode, because, just what little I've watched, there's a couple of good plot lines. Yeah, there's a ton to look at there.
And it's amazing for any of you guys who love Bruce Lee, like I do. So this is Bruce Lee's baby. This is the show that became Kung Fu, that was stolen from Bruce Lee. This is his original plot line, all of the information they had, and then they dumped all of the historicity they could into this show about the 1850s San Francisco, and how the Chinese immigrants are trying to establish themselves, with the Irish immigrants trying to establish themselves, and again, the natives trying to keep what they have against the encroachments, the perceived encroachments of these immigrants. And so you get to see, because it's Bruce Lee's baby, all of the dopest fighting styles, and the main character does an amazing Bruce Lee impersonation. The show is phenomenal.
Well, That's it then. You have to come join us for our next episode when we start covering Warrior. Not quite minute by minute, but definitely fight scene by fight scene. You can find more of Jamie and how he can make you stronger at plagueofstrength.com. You can learn more about old American food on my other podcast, The History of American Food. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.